The night had descended heavily upon St. Grace Hospital, its shadow stretching long over room 304. Inside, 8-year-old Ethan Parker fought quietly against a fate that seemed inevitable. The heart monitor's beeps were erratic, each pulse weaker than the last. His parents, Sarah and Michael, sat beside his bed, unable to hold back their tears as they watched their son's fragile, pale figure, eyes closed and breathing labored. It was a pain they didn't know how to bear. By his side, Charlie, the loyal golden retriever, refused to leave, his snout resting gently on the boy's hand as if guarding him from an unseen danger. Hours earlier, Dr. Richard Coleman had entered the room with a solemn look. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice breaking the silence. "There's nothing more we can do. Ethan's heart is too weak." Those words felt like a punch to the gut. Sarah and Michael knew time was running out, but hearing the finality of it was unbearable. Since then, the room had felt suffocating, filled with silent tears and distant, lost gazes. Yet Charlie, as if sensing something beyond human comprehension, paced anxiously, as if waiting for a miracle. Suddenly, the dog froze, his ears perking up. His attention snapped to the window, where the full moon bathed the room in an intense, unnatural light. It was as though Charlie could feel something the others couldn't. The air in the room seemed to shift, heavy with an unspoken tension. Sarah, noticing the dog's unease, exchanged a look with Michael, a mix of hope and fear. Then, without warning, Ethan's heart monitor began to beep erratically. The shrill alarm echoed through the room, causing Sarah to scream, "Doctor, please, come quickly!" The medical team rushed in, and chaos erupted. Dr. Coleman adjusted the equipment, while nurses tried to stabilize Ethan. Amid the commotion, Charlie jumped onto the bed, pressing his body against the boys. "Get that dog out of here," Dr. Coleman barked, visibly frustrated. "No," Sarah pleaded, wringing her hands. "Please, let him stay." She looked at the doctor with desperate eyes, her voice trembling. After a tense moment, the doctor reluctantly relented. Part A. Charlie lay next to Ethan, his deep, steady breaths in sync with the boys. What happened next left everyone in stunned silence. The heart monitor gradually began to stabilize. Ethan's body shifted, and for the first time in days, his eyes fluttered open. In a voice weaker than a whisper, he murmured, "Charlie, you didn't leave me." The room was still. Sarah's tears turned into uncontrollable sobs as Michael held Ethan's hand tightly. Dr. Coleman, standing motionless, couldn't believe his eyes, but there was something in Charlie's gaze, something that seemed to suggest he knew that somehow, something greater than medicine was at play. In that moment, a question lingered in the air. How far could a dog's love go to save the one they cherished most? The relief in the room was palpable, though no one could quite grasp the reality of what had just unfolded. The doctors stared at the monitors, baffled. Ethan's eyes remained open, his breathing weak but steady. Charlie remained at his side, as if his mere presence had sparked the miraculous change. Sarah gently cupped Ethan's face in both hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You're here, Ethan. You came back to us," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Still in disbelief, Dr. Coleman stepped forward, careful not to give false hope. "I don't know what happened, but Ethan is responding. We'll monitor him closely. This kind of recovery, it's highly unusual." He spoke cautiously, as though even the words seemed impossible to believe. As Sarah and Michael focused on their son, something peculiar was happening with Charlie. The energetic dog, usually lively and full of spirit, now appeared drained, as though he had carried an immense weight. He climbed down from the bed and lay on the floor, never taking his eyes off Ethan. Sarah noticed the shift and gently stroked his head. "You saved him, Charlie. You're our angel," she whispered, her voice full of gratitude. Despite Ethan's sudden improvement, the tension in the room remained thick. Dr. Coleman ordered a series of tests to understand what had just transpired. The nurses moved to adjust the equipment around Ethan, who lay quietly, still conscious but unspoken. Sarah and Michael were told to wait outside, but neither of them could bear to leave their son. They both felt a deep, unshakable sense that Ethan needed them now more than ever. And so did Charlie. Meanwhile, Michael's mind began to wander, and he recalled something he had read years ago. He looked at Sarah hesitantly. "Have you ever heard of cases where animals heal people?" Michael asked softly. "It's not scientific, but..." Sarah, still holding Ethan's hand, shook her head, her mind struggling to keep up with the strange turn of events. "Michael, I don't know what happened," she said, her voice trembling, "but I'm starting to believe Charlie did something none of us understand." At that moment, Ethan closed his eyes again, not out of weakness, but in a peaceful rest he hadn't had in weeks. Despite the monitor showing stability, a mystery lingered in the air. Was it Charlie's love that saved Ethan, or was something deeper, something inexplicable happening between them? The hours following Ethan's unexpected recovery were marked by tense silence and lingering questions. The medical team could confirm that Ethan's condition had stabilized, but they had no answers. Dr. Coleman, known for his skeptical nature and reliance on science, spent hours reviewing the initial test results. Nothing could explain Ethan's sudden improvement. Meanwhile, Charlie remained by the boy's side, his energy visibly drained. Something about the dog's behavior was puzzling, almost as if he had given up part of himself to save Ethan. Michael watched Charlie intently, recalling a story his grandfather had once told him about dogs who could share their life force with humans in times of extreme need. It was an ancient belief without scientific support, but the memory felt all too real as he watched the exhausted dog. He hesitated before mentioning it to Sarah, but seeing the distant look in her eyes, he finally spoke. "Sarah, doesn't Charlie seem different to you? Tired, but not like a dog who's been running all day. It's something deeper." Sarah, still holding Ethan's hand, looked at her husband. "Yes, he's different, but I can't shake the feeling that he feels what Ethan feels, like they're connected somehow." As they whispered, Ethan opened his eyes again, more alert this time. He managed a faint smile and whispered, "Charlie was with me the whole time." Sarah and Michael exchanged surprised glances. "What do you mean, honey?" Sarah asked gently, leaning closer to her son. "Where it was dark," Ethan whispered. "When I felt like I was alone, he was there. I could hear Charlie. He didn't let me go." The words hung in the air, heavy with emotion. Michael's throat tightened as he tried to comprehend how a dog could be with Ethan, wherever he was. He glanced over at Charlie, who now lay on the floor beside the bed, his ears slightly raised as if still alert. Later that night, after the nurse's frantic pace had slowed and the hospital finally quieted, Sarah sat next to Ethan, her thoughts a tangled mess. Michael stepped out to grab some coffee. Then, Ethan said something that sent a chill down Sarah's spine. "Mom, when I was in that dark place, I heard a voice. It was like Charlie was calling me, but not just him. I felt like someone wanted me to stay, like it was important that I didn't leave." Sarah froze, unable to respond. She felt an eerie, yet comforting sense that there was something beyond what could be seen. Something, or someone, had worked through Charlie to bring Ethan back. As she held her son's hand, watching him sleep once more, one question echoed in her mind. What else did Charlie know that they didn't? The following morning, the hospital room felt eerily calm. Ethan was still fast asleep, his breathing peaceful for the first time in weeks. Michael sat beside him, his eyes fixed on Charlie. The dog remained in the same spot, his head resting heavily on the floor, as if all of his energy was being focused solely on being there for Ethan. Sarah noticed this and whispered, "Michael, have you noticed? He hasn't left Ethan's side for even a second. He hasn't eaten anything since yesterday." Michael nodded, but something troubled him even more. Gathering his courage, he moved closer to Charlie and gently ran his hand through the dog's golden fur. Charlie didn't react immediately. He simply lifted his tired eyes and let out a deep sigh, his gaze filled with sadness and something Michael couldn't quite place. "It's almost like he understands something we can't," Michael murmured to himself. As if on cue, Ethan stirred, slowly opening his eyes. Seeing Charlie on the floor, he reached out for him. Sarah helped him sit up, concern in her eyes, but Ethan seemed determined. "I need him, Mom. He's the reason I'm here," he said, his voice still weak but firm enough to leave Sarah speechless. Before Sarah could respond, Dr. Coleman entered with a clipboard in hand, his face a mixture of relief and confusion. "Ethan's tests are normal," he said, glancing at the monitors. "But this doesn't make sense. There was no indication he could recover this quickly." He paused, clearly baffled, before looking at Michael and Sarah. Did you notice anything unusual? Any changes that could explain this?" Michael and Sarah exchanged a look, unsure how to explain what had just happened without sounding insane. How could they tell the doctor that the bond between a boy and his dog might have played a role in Ethan's recovery? "All we know is that Charlie hasn't left his side," Sarah answered calmly, though her voice was tinged with uncertainty. Dr. Coleman glanced at Charlie, considering the unlikely possibility that the dog could be part of the reason for Ethan's miraculous recovery. He knew he couldn't base any conclusions on something so unscientific, but the intensity in the dog's gaze made him hesitate. "We'll continue monitoring Ethan," Dr. Coleman said, his voice quiet with uncertainty. "But I have to admit, this case is unlike anything I've seen before." After the doctor left, Michael moved toward the window, searching for answers in the gray landscape outside. He knew something extraordinary was happening, something that defied explanation. As he looked back at Charlie, whose exhaustion was becoming more evident, a wave of guilt washed over him. The dog seemed to be carrying a burden, one that Michael couldn't ease. Charlie remained by Ethan's side, his eyes now dull, his strength visibly fading with each passing hour. Sarah's heart tightened as she watched the dog, feeling as though Charlie was losing something vital. Yet his determination to protect Ethan never wavered. Michael noticed small changes in Charlie's behavior. He no longer reacted to sounds, nor did he lift his head when called. It was as though his very being was being drained. Ethan, however, showed improvement no one could explain. That afternoon, he asked to sit up on the edge of the bed, his voice firmer now. "Mom, I need Charlie to stay with me, even if he's tired." Sarah tried to hide her worry, but Charlie's fragility was impossible to ignore. Still, how could she deny her son when he seemed to be coming back to life after what felt like a nightmare? That night, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that something beyond his understanding was happening. He went to the hallway and stood by the window, gazing up at the bright stars. The scene felt unsettling, as if there was something more to Charlie's actions than anyone realized. When he returned to the room, he found Sarah sitting beside Ethan, who was sleeping peacefully. Charlie, as always, remained still on the floor, eyes locked on the boy. Michael knelt beside the dog and ran his hand over his head. "You're doing something none of us understand, aren't you?" he whispered, "but at what cost?" The next morning, Dr. Coleman entered with new test results, his expression one of incredulity. "There's no way to explain this," he said, staring at the monitors. "Ethan is not only stable, but he's showing signs of full recovery. If this continues, we may discharge him soon." Sat in silence, the weight of everything that had transpired settling around them. It was hard to understand, hard to put into words what had happened. The bond between Ethan and Charlie was beyond anything they could explain or comprehend, something so powerful it had transcended the physical world. Ethan sat up in his bed, looking at Charlie, his gaze soft and filled with both sadness and gratitude. His voice was barely above a whisper as he spoke. "Charlie was my hero. He saved me." Tears filled his eyes, and his parents could do nothing but hold him close, knowing that the miracle they had witnessed had come at a great cost. Michael, his own emotions raw, stood at the window watching as the sun rose higher, casting a golden light on the world outside. He realized that life, like the seasons, moved forward, but some things would never be the same. Charlie had given everything for his son, and now it was their turn to honor that love and sacrifice. The room remained still, filled with a quiet peace that spoke of love, loss, and the mysteries of the heart. There were no answers, no explanations that could explain the depths of what had happened. But one thing was clear: the connection between Ethan and Charlie, a bond forged in something deeper than the visible world, would live on in their hearts forever. To the world, every action, every small gesture of kindness became a tribute to the dog who had given everything to save Ethan. The family's hearts, forever changed, found purpose in spreading the lessons Charlie had left behind. That love, pure and selfless, could heal and inspire in ways nothing else could. Ethan, now growing stronger each day, became a voice for the animals in need, sharing Charlie's story with anyone who would listen. His artwork, filled with images of the golden retriever running freely through fields, served as a constant reminder of the bond they shared. His drawings were displayed at the local animal shelters they visited, each one a tribute to the dog who had saved him. Over time, the family's mission grew. They worked tirelessly to ensure that abandoned dogs found homes, often with a picture of Charlie in their hands, explaining how love could transform not only a family, but an entire community. Michael and Sarah, inspired by their son's newfound purpose, became advocates as well, often speaking about the extraordinary bond between humans and animals and the deep, unspoken connections that go beyond the visible world. Charlie's collar, once worn with pride, now served as a symbol of the eternal love that had brought Ethan back to life. It hung in a place of honor in their home, a constant reminder of the dog's unspoken sacrifice. And while the sadness of his passing never fully left them, they learned to embrace his memory, not with sorrow, but with gratitude. Family, forever changed by the love Charlie had given them, continued to live in a way that honored his legacy. Their actions spread the idea that true love, especially when given without expectation, can heal the deepest wounds and create ripples that touch countless lives. In every rescue, every life saved, every story shared, Charlie's spirit lived on, lighting a path of kindness and love for others to follow. In the end, Charlie's journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. His legacy, rooted in sacrifice and love, continued to inspire, heal, and transform. And in the hearts of those who knew him, his memory remained a beacon, a reminder of the incredible power of unconditional love.